Yes. Hello, my name is Dylan Andrews. I graduated from Kennebunk High School in 1998. I went to Hartwood School of Art. I went to Maine College of Art, early admission. I went to Haystack Art Immersion Camp. My father is an artist. My uncle is an artist. My sister was an art teacher. My cousin is an art teacher. My mother is a teacher. So I've always loved drawing and illustration. I first started looking at comic books when I was about 5 years old. I think those are some of my earliest memories, going to the gas station. I think Wolverine issue number 4, the Frank Miller issue. I remember it vividly. He's got Wolverine, it's got like a green cover, and he's got like a crossbow. So seeing those images as a young person really just ignited my inspiration. I found those to be just some of the most compelling, visually interesting, exciting stories I had ever seen. So, red light blinking. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, it's great.
Cool. So, I loved seeing those books and getting immersed in those stories. And when I was first seeing them, I didn't understand how they were made. And so I was looking at the images, and it just it was a puzzle I couldn't figure out. And so what I would do is I'd take like Sharpie markers and I would just draw in the comics to try to kind of wrap my mind around it. So whenever Wolverine didn't have his claws out, I'd like draw his claws in just to kind of figure out how these were put together. And so I was reading comics, collecting comics, grabbing anything I could find. And back then in the 80s, comic books were available everywhere. So you could get them at the gas station, get them at the grocery store, get them at the convenience store. They were just something that anytime you went anywhere, there were spinner racks, you just pull comics off. And they were relatively cheap. And they were all very, very good. So reading comics as a young reader, my father was an artist, and so he loved the illustrations. My mother was a reading teacher, so she loved the fact that I enjoyed reading. So they would just keep getting me comics. So I'd buy comics all the time. So as I progressed and got older and started to draw more and got more, did more illustration, I kind of fell out of it a little bit, especially after the 90s, just because the comic book industry sort of collapsed around that point. So comic books were less available. I was less interested in them, and it just wasn't as inspiring to me. But I was still always drawing and creating my own characters. So I went to Syracuse University, 1998 to 2002. And at the time, illustration was something I was interested in, but I didn't see it as a career. Comic books were at a really low point. I'd still go to comic book stores and see what was happening, but there wasn't any excitement around it. I also didn't see that as a way to build a career. But graphic design was something that was just starting to become really exciting. Digital illustration, digital media, Adobe suite of software. That was something that was just on the verge of being big. So I was thinking, well, I could graduate with communications design, then go into publishing, do magazines, do advertising layout. So I did that, graduated from Syracuse University, started working came back to Maine to be near my family, because I love Maine, I love being here, greatest state in the world. So started working at the Journal Tribune newspaper in Biddeford, doing layout, doing advertising. And the great thing about working there was they had a press on site. So I could figure out how to create content, advertising, illustrations in the morning, and then they would be printed and published that day. So it was a daily newspaper. So it was a very, very rapid turnaround. So started working at the Journal Tribune, but newspapers also not really a career. It seems like they were kind of on their way out even then, even in the 2000s. So went into magazine publishing in Portland, worked at a company there, doing a business-to-business magazine, doing trade show graphics, doing my own freelance design work, but always loved comic books. So at that time, I started spending a lot of time on my coffee breaks and on the weekends going to comic book stores, because comic books were late 2000s starting to come up again. They were starting to become more popular. The Marvel movies were starting to be produced. Iron Man had come out, Captain America had come out, people were excited about comic books again. And so I was like, man, it really kind of reignited my love and passion, because I'd been in publishing for years and really felt burned out on very corporate elements. So spent a lot of time in the comic book store, and I saw that they had a local shelf with local creators' work. And I was like, oh man, if I could get a comic book made, stick it on the shelf, I could be like in the comic book store. I mean, I grew up in comic book stores. That would be awesome. So I did that. I created my own characters, made these little ash can mini comics, stapled them together myself, and just kind of stuck them on the shelves at the comic book store. And then crowdfunding was very popular at the time, so I started trying to figure out how to do crowdfunding. saw that these other local creators lived in that area, lived in and around Portland, wanted to kind of just spend time with them and figure out how they were working on comic books. So they're very inclusive. They're like, yeah, come out to the bar, let's hang out, let's draw. Ended up getting a studio with a bunch of other local creators, making comic books, doing crowdfunding, started traveling to conventions up and down the East Coast, Chicago, North Carolina, Baltimore, Maine, obviously, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, San Diego, did San Diego Comic-Con, New York Comic-Con. So all the big shows, Boston Comic-Con, all the big shows up and down the East Coast. Loved traveling, loved doing conventions, loved showing my work and showing my comics to people. And then the pandemic hit and everything ended. So all the shows were canceled. The comic book industry at that time had been really propped up by wanting to get Netflix deals. That all ended. Streaming wars, that all ended. So publishing, importing comic books, the production costs went through the roof. Everything really seemed rather tumultuous in publishing and comic books at that time. So I started teaching. And I love teaching. Mike Lee, Professor Lee, was kind enough to, I did a quick little comic con here a few years ago, right before the pandemic. And he was like, yeah, you want to teach here? We'd love to have you in the digital media department. And I was like, yes, I'd love to. My family is filled with teachers and artists and illustrators. I'd love to teach here at the community college. Incredible facility, wonderful students, great faculty. So happy and appreciative to be here. Love sharing my passion for comic books with people. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, so at the time, Syracuse, and still has a great program for they call it communication design. It's a very rigorous program. They really are pretty hard on the students. It was pretty rough. So it was one of those ones where you're sitting in the giant auditorium. They go, okay, look to your left and look to your right. Both of those students will have flunked out. And I'm like, oh no. So I'm like, I really don't want to flunk out. So it was very difficult initially to weed out people that they didn't think would be committed enough to have it as a career, because they only wanted really talented creators to come out of that, because it reflects on the industry and that reflects on the school. So it was great to have that sort of forged in fire, steel sharpened steel experience. And I also did a lot of illustration and took that on, not as a minor, but I did a lot of illustration classes too, which I loved. And it really helped because once you get into the industry of working professionally as a designer, an illustrator, very competitive. There are a lot of people that are incredibly talented, and really to be able to stand out or have clients or work for fans or readers, you have to be able to do a lot of different things. And so that was the one thing that Syracuse really taught me. And what I try to teach my students is have as many skills as you can. So learn the different software, be excited about all these different things, really try to pull from stuff that you're inspired by, stay passionate, stay motivated, and create stuff that you love and appreciate and enjoy, because hopefully that would find an audience that loves and appreciates and enjoys it also.
Awesome.
I always say that it's a two-way. So I love being in front of the students. I love showing them my work. I love sharing work I'm inspired and excited about. I love giving them challenges and see how they problem solve. And I come away from every class invigorated and excited and energetic. It helps me to stay productive, because being a creative professional can be a pretty solitary endeavor. You're often in a studio or working remotely. Maybe you're in an office, but oftentimes you're having to do client work or having to meet deadlines, and it can be rather stressful. So being able to be among other motivated individuals, young students that are excited about creating, and I learn from them. So I am always asking, like, what are you reading? What video games are you playing? What movies are you seeing? What cartoons are coming out? And so many of them are like, oh, there's this manga I just got and I really love it. And so I try to go, oh, okay, let me seek that out myself and try to find out what it is about that a younger reader or viewer would be interested in. So it's been really, really wonderful, and I've had so many wonderful students.
Awesome.
Let's show you, these are just a couple of the books I've done. I've produced a lot of comics, and the thing is, I'm always drawing and always writing and always creating. So some of my earliest stuff is Archive the Warhood Odyssey. This is volumes 1 and 2. These are trade paperback formats, which is a perfect bound, glued in spine. Black and white. This volume 2 is all drawn digitally. Volume 1 is all drawn traditionally, pencils, pens, paper, and then scanned in. This work was done 2015, 2016, 2017, and then crowdfunded, did the graphic novel trade paperback collections 2018. I look back at this work and it feels very immature. This is really me trying to figure it out. Even, 2015, 2016, there's so much that you have to know in order to publish or self-publish something.
Yeah.
There's design, there's typography, I'm doing logos, I'm coloring, I'm illustrating, I'm lettering. And that's why I love teaching it, because I've said to my students, comic books, graphic novels, sequential art require so many different skills. And speaking again to how you have to know a lot about a lot of different things. And so with digital media, there's so much to it. And so that's why I love teaching comics or talking about comics or bringing comic books into the classroom, because there's so many different parts and pieces that you have to be familiar with. So after that, the Archive the Warhood Odyssey, I did a series called The Oppressors, which is, so Archive is kind of my sci-fi futuristic character. The Oppressors is kind of a modern day vigilante story. It's like a prison escape story. So this is issue 1, and then this is a collection of volume 1. I did issue 1 traditionally, pencils, pens, paper, and then I redrew it digitally, because just in the amount of time from going to issue 1 to the issue 3, I learned so much and evolved so much as an artist. I was like, I got to redraw some of that stuff. So I love all that stuff. And so that was The Oppressors. And then I was like, well, I have a futuristic story and I have a story that takes place modern day. So then I did Sis the Skin Grafter, which is Viking mythology, sort of sword and sorcery story, takes place in the past. So then I was like, well, I have this futuristic sci-fi story and this modern day vigilante story. And then I have this kind of sword and sorcery classic medieval story. How would I combine those? So then I did a crossover event. These are all successfully crowdfunded on Kickstarter. Crossover event is the Archive Universe series, issues 1, 2, and 3. And then this is like a raw edition, which is just like raw digital pencils. Yeah, so issues 1, 2, and 3, where this one character named Ledge, who can time travel, brings all these characters together. So brings the Warhood, brings Versus from the Oppressors, and brings Sis from the Skin Grafter from that series, and kind of connects all those stories together. It's pretty ambitious, and it was fun. It was just a fun sort of time travel story, which I felt like really kind of connected everything in that series. And after that, I was like, okay, that's a little out of hand. I've gotten a little, it's gotten a little hard for people to just jump in. So I said, I need to create a series that's more, it's easier for people to access. So I started doing like Engraved, which is Calvin Chase, who was cursed by a disease that is slowly turning him into a monster. He has to figure out how he became engraved before it eats him alive. And this was around the pandemic time with like viruses and fear. So it's a little darker, a little scarier. I wanted it to kind of feel like X-Files, where it's like Monster of the Week, sort of, with an overarching story. So I did like 6 issues of that series, created all these logos, did shirts, did hats, did graphics, all crowdfunded. Really learned a lot during the creation of this series. Love this character, and I'd love to bring this character back. I'd love to do more with this character. So I'm thinking maybe I'm gonna touch upon him and maybe do some more engraved stuff in the future. So that was really fun, but kind of dark. And so after that, I was like, I need to lighten it up a little bit. So at that point, I did Cringe, which is sort of a silly, goofy monster mercenary comic. But he also takes place in the Archive universe and connects in with those characters. Oh, there's another engraved book. And then at that point, I was like, all right, I've done a lot of this sort of action 90s, big, powerful character hero kind of books. I need to do something that's more younger reader, cartoony, for my kid. Like what kind of comic would I show to my kid? So the most recent series I did, which was just Kickstarter funded, is Lobstar and Kid Claw. So this is my young reader, all ages comic. It's definitely more influenced by like classic Superman, classic Batman, Batman the Animated Series cartoon, CC Beck, Captain Marvel, all stuff I talk about in class. So I love this series. And this first one, he fights against AI. He fights AI robots. And then he fights Urchin, like this monster in these second ones. So this kind of has that classic comic book coloring techniques. And if you want to see any of this work, go to lobstarcomic.com to read any of these issues or read the first issue. DylanAndrewsArt.com if you want to see any books, and Batlantic Studios, which is what I publish under, if you want to read any comic books online there. And of course, all this is available on my website, Dylan Andrews Art, Batlantic Studios, and can connect to my social media there too. And then I got some random stuff. So Warhood, it's this is the character from Archive, the Warhood Odyssey. I had him do his own series, and I'm going to do issue 2 next year, because I started in 2015 and next year's 2025. So I was like, got to do the 10-year anniversary of that. And then these are some other random characters. Hit and Run I did a one-shot with, which was also a really fun series. And then these are some bootleg comics. So these are comics I made just to kind of showcase how I would work on characters I don't own. So Batman, Spawn, this is available online too, BatmanDarkLeague.com. BatmanDarkJustice.com, just me kind of showcasing to publishers my illustration techniques and how I draw. So, and I just love making comics. So those are just kind of ones I give out to publishers as promotional pieces. Yeah, so the story elements often are pulled from a lot of different scenarios and situations. I try to be inspired by things I'm passionate about. I try to find stuff I enjoy illustrating. I know that some people are like, oh, you know, there's that drawback of being the writer-artist, because oftentimes with comic books, it's an assembly line. So you'll have the writer, you have the penciler, you'll have the inker, you'll have the colorist, you'll have the editor, you'll have the publisher, different roles. I'm all of those roles. And so I don't want to write something that Dylan the artist is going to hate drawing. And I don't want to draw something that Dylan the publisher is going to hate printing. And I don't want to print something that Dylan the editor is going to have to go out into a convention and pitch. So I really want to make it a fun and enjoyable experience for myself, so I stay motivated and stay creative. So often I'll be like, with talking about those story elements, I'm like, all right, now I need to do something kind of silly or funny. Or now I need to do something that's a little more serious, a little darker. Like now I need to do something that's going this direction or that direction. Like I'm always inspired by things I see. I'm always pulling from things around me. And I have limitless ideas. And the only problem is that the time it takes to create a comic. It looks like a huge stack of books here, but this is years of work. I mean, it takes for a long time to come up with the idea, do the character designs, come up with a story, plot everything out, rough everything out, draw everything, ink everything, color everything, get it printed, get it shipped. It's a large amount of work, but I love it. I love working on comics. I love publishing. Sure. It's never been easier to get your work in front of people because of social media and the internet. When I was coming up, wasn't an option. So if you wanted to have anything printed and distributed, you had to get a publisher to bite, to invest in you as a creator, which was incredibly difficult. You had to live in the cities that these things were being produced in, or FedEx them back and forth, because it was all drawn traditionally on paper. Now I can draw something in the morning and put it on Instagram and have people see it pretty immediately, which is great, but also can be difficult because you're competing with everyone else that's putting content out into the world too. So I would say for students, really enjoy this time here learning, because as a student, you really have the freedom to work on anything you're passionate about. And that's often what I tell my students now is like, work on stuff you're excited about, work on stuff you're passionate about, try to go in that direction. Because once we get out of school and have to pay bills and have to work professionally, you're gonna often be working for clients or for a publisher, or if you're lucky, or this might just be a hobby that you want to pursue. So really do everything you can now to learn as much as you can, to be excited, to be passionate, because it's a hard industry, it's a hard career, So you have to be passionate, you have to be excited, and have to keep going, keep motivated, and keep working.
Awesome.
As a creator, I often see the flaws in a lot of the work I produce. I think most people that create content, they see it and they go, that was fun. I enjoyed that process. I could do it better next time. And that's always kind of what keeps me going. So if I was to look at any of these, I would be like, oh, I like the paper I chose for the cover of this one. Like, I like some of the color on this newer stuff I've been working on. That's kind of a neat sort of coloring technique, this sort of dot pattern, sort of classic coloring. I think that's really fun.
Yeah.
But I often am like, I can do better next time. Like, I can get that better next time. I can draw that better next time. So that pushes me forward. I think most creative people would look back at their old work and be not embarrassed, but they realize like, oh yeah, that's that time in my life, and it's hard for me to reflect on it. I remember where I was more than the work itself. I'm like, oh, I remember working on that and it was snowing and it was cold and I was drinking a cup of coffee. Like, I remember that time in my life, which is fun to reflect on. But often the work itself, I'm always working on the next thing. I'm always excited about the next project.